coalition intends on Monday afternoon here in Israel to pass the first reading of the judicial overhaul's first two provisions. For the second straight week, protests are held at this time across the country against the government's legislation. The passing of this legislation would give the government control over judicial appointments and allow it to block the High Court of Justice from ruling on basic laws. The protest started this morning with marches for parents and children at 8 a.m., a one-hour labor strike beginning at 10 a.m., just now, Israel time, and a central protest outside the Knesset in Jerusalem will begin at 2 p.m. People from across the country, dozens of thousands of them, are making their way to Jerusalem as we speak. Monday's vote would mark the coalition's official rejection of President Isaac Herzog's negotiation plan, which included a freezing of the legislation before the first provisions pass the first reading, of course. Under a wave of American officials cautioning against his government's march away from democracy, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke with visiting American Jewish leaders on Sunday.
Israel is a democracy and will remain a democracy with majority rule and proper safeguards for civil liberties. There's been a lot of rhetoric that is frankly reckless and dangerous, including calls for bloodshed in the streets and calls for civil war. Now, this has encouraged the likes of Hezbollah, Iran's terror proxy in Lebanon, and other enemies to believe this nonsense. Well, I'm going to disappoint Israel's enemies. If you're waiting for a civil war, it ain't going to happen. There's not going to be any civil war. There will be no bloodshed, I hope, none at all.
Aviv Bushinsky, a former media advisor and chief of staff for Netanyahu, joins us now. Hi, Aviv.
Good morning.
Good morning. Is it a good morning? I don't see you protesting on the streets, but I don't see you defending this reform or overhaul either.
First of all, it's good for democracy because everybody's involved. Either you're in favor or against this reform or the revolution. But we've just heard Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking about the situation. But you see, Ariel, how awkward or distorted the situation is, that the Prime Minister is actually prohibited from intervening, from trying to maybe find a resolution to this huge conflict between the ones who oppose and the ones who agree to the amendments in the judicial system. So yes, it is a troubling morning, but I think it is quite good for democracy.
I think having heard what Netanyahu just reassured leaders of American Jewry, how do you explain to your fellow Americans what's happening here? Because the White House is warning that Netanyahu is marching Israel towards away, let's say, from democracy. They're not saying towards dictatorship, or saying away from democracy. But then many Americans ask, okay, but here in the U.S., for example, judges are appointed by the president as well. So what would be the difference? Why are so many Israelis, and we're talking about dozens of thousands, going to the streets these weeks? What's at the core of this?
In terms of explaining or justifying the ongoing reforms or what the government is trying to do, I think the battle is lost. Netanyahu will not be able to explain why they are going, so to speak, to the extreme with those changes, though most people, especially in the parliament, agree that reforms are needed to be done, but not this way and not to such an extent. I think that was a mistake, the way it was presented to begin with, by a very strange statement made by Minister Levin, Minister of Justice, and now it is too late. I think that Netanyahu and his government will have to chase themselves and try to fix the situation and explain what's going on. But this should be done only after the first call, which might start today. Why the first call? Because if you do it before, then you drop the new legislation, and it is going to be freezed for at least 6 months. So trying to maneuver between the two situations, I think that only after the first call, Netanyahu or the government will have to make the amendments, because, as I said, in terms of PR, they lost the battle. People don't understand what's going on, and they think that they're going to imbalance the Knesset and the judicial system. And you see it also overseas. You saw Ambassador Knights talking about it, Blinken talking about it, Macron talking about it. So I think that Netanyahu at the moment is quite in a lose-lose situation.
So, Aviv, you're expecting that after the first reading today, the negotiations will begin with the president involved, but only after it's already in the process of, and then maybe the second or third reading will not happen as quickly as next week?
I'm confident. I think that also, if you'll ask most Likud members and the Likud supporters and the Likud MKs, they all think that some kind of reforms needed to be done, but not as extreme as they are presented now by the first hearing. So yes, no doubt, and I think that Netanyahu has other issues to confront with. You just mentioned the nuclear enrichment in Iran. Netanyahu desired to do something with the Saudi Arabians. Going through this current path, it will lead Netanyahu nowhere. And knowing Netanyahu, he still wants to be remembered and have some line in his history, long-lasting history, and in the sixth term, not to write something home about. It will be disappointing for Netanyahu, disappointing for the people in Israel. Therefore, I think that some kind of a compromise will be reached, by only after the first call or the first vote that might occur today.
Aviv Bushinsky, a pleasure as always. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Bianca Zanini is at the Knesset in Jerusalem. Bianca, it might be still quiet behind you, but what's happening around the country? Dozens of thousands of demonstrators are already taking to the streets.
That's right, Ariel. Certainly a lot at stake today, and emotions are high. And you said it, maybe here inside the Knesset, things are still calm. There is an energy buzzing because it is such a big day, because it is such an important day. But outside, things are already happening. This morning began with protesters blocking the homes of several Knesset members, including one who has an autistic child, and that has drawn condemnation from both opposition leader Yair Lapid and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. 8 people have been detained so far. Police is deployed in high numbers, large numbers here in Jerusalem specifically. We also heard from the police commissioner, who's warned against sort of fanning the flames and tumult, and called for calmer minds to prevail. Now, we know that the main protest is scheduled for today at 2 p.m. right outside of the Knesset. At least 30,000 people are expected to show up and to participate. What we know so far is that the transportation minister, Miri Regev, has declined for the second time, for the second week in a row, to bolster transportation to Jerusalem. So we're already seeing roads being blocked by protesters, and traffic is already beginning to be crazy in and out of Jerusalem. It's going to be a very difficult day for anyone trying to exit or enter the city. And it's not just in Jerusalem. As you mentioned, we are starting to see smaller protests around the country.
Across the country, from north to south. Thank you very much, Bianca. We have to part here, but we'll be back with you, I'm sure, later today.